Ivory Coast elections, final rule or forever rule. Africa, a land of youthful dreams, led by presidents old enough to be their grandfathers. A continent full of life, but often governed by leaders who seem to fear change more than chaos. Today on See Africa TV, we turn our focus to Ivory Coast, where yet another election has come and gone, and President Alassane Ouattara has once again claimed victory. But beneath the calm of the streets, beneath the smiling portraits and the official results, lies a question that echoes across Africa. Is this Ouattara's final rule, or his forever rule? The official numbers tell one story, but the silence of the people tells another. Ouattara won with nearly 90% of the vote. A landslide, they called it, a triumph of experience. Yet voter turnout was barely above half of the registered population. For many Ivorians, the election didn't feel like a choice. It felt like déjà vu. Once again, the same faces, the same names, the same promises, while the youth, who make up nearly 70% of the country's population, watched from the sidelines, some voting reluctantly, others staying home altogether. To understand this, we must go back to 2010, when Alassane Ouattara's rise to power came after a bloody post-election crisis that left over 3,000 people dead. Ivory Coast emerged from that nightmare deeply divided, along ethnic, political, and regional lines. For many, Ouattara represented stability, recovery, and a new beginning. And indeed, in his first years, the economy grew. Roads were rebuilt, the capital looked brighter. But as the years went on, stability became a tool of survival, not for the nation, but for the leadership itself. Opposition figures were exiled, jailed, or disqualified. Political competition shrank, and democracy, once revived, began to fade into a ritual of routine victories. So when Ouattara announced he would run again, after promising to step down, many Ivorians asked, how many times can a promise be broken before trust disappears? The government argued that the new constitution reset his term limits. Critics said it was a manipulation of law and legacy. But in a region where leaders bend constitutions like paper, who was really surprised? The Africanews headline captured it perfectly: Ouattara's final rule or forever rule. It's a question that now defines politics not only in Côte d'Ivoire, but across the continent.
Mon papa Alassane là, il n'a qu'à laisser 4 ans mandat. Faut pas, il va écouter bouche de ses partisans qui le suivent là. Il est fatigué. De toute façon, il me plaît comme ça là. Il n'a qu'à quitter au pouvoir. Parce qu'on lutte pour nos enfants pour demain. Pour les vieux là, on ne lutte pas pour eux. On lutte pour nos enfants demain.
Il n'y a pas de distinction de partis politiques. Nous sommes un peuple. Et nous sommes venus dire oui à la réinscription du président Laurent Gbagbo et du président Tidjane Thiam. Et non à une forfaiture, non à un 4e mandat.
From Cameroon's Paul Biya, now in his 90s and still holding office after more than 4 decades, to Uganda's Yoweri Museveni, who has ruled since 1986, to Congo's Sassou Nguesso, who has been in and out of power since the 1970s. Africa is witnessing a generational standoff, the old refusing to leave and the young refusing to give up. The Africanews analysis went further, asking, why do old presidents still win? And the answer is both simple and tragic. They win because the systems are built to protect them. They win because opposition parties are weakened, divided, or silenced. They win because electoral commissions are loyal, not neutral. And they win because so many young people have lost faith in the ballot. The victory of the old has become the defeat of hope. In Ivory Coast, the youth speak of unemployment, of rising costs, of political fatigue. Many of them see migration, not participation, as their only path forward. How can a nation so young feel so old? But let's pause, because the story isn't all one-sided. Supporters of Ouattara argue that his leadership has kept Ivory Coast from falling back into war, that his economic reforms have made the country one of West Africa's strongest economies, that his experience is needed in a dangerous time, especially when jihadist violence is spreading south from Mali and Burkina Faso. To them, his victory is not a sign of greed, but of stability, a continuity that protects the fragile peace. And in fairness, stability does matter. Ivory Coast has been through too much blood to gamble lightly with chaos. But here's the truth. Stability without renewal becomes stagnation. Peace without participation becomes silence. Africa cannot afford to keep recycling leadership while the world races ahead. The continent's future, its innovation, its creativity, its digital power, rests in the hands of the young. Yet those hands remain tied behind the walls of old power. After the elections, Africanews drew parallels between Cameroon and Ivory Coast. In both nations, the youth watched as history repeated itself. Generational tension turned into quiet frustration, because this isn't just about presidents refusing to retire, it's about a generation being denied the right to lead. Africa's youth are now the largest generation in the continent's history. Over 400 million young Africans are under 25, and they are not just statistics. They are coders, designers, thinkers, farmers, engineers, dreamers. They want opportunity, not charity. They want voice, not lectures. They want space, not speeches. Yet their leaders seem to speak to them like children, not as the heirs of tomorrow. In the streets of Abidjan, a young Ivorian woman put it simply, "We respect Ouattara, but we want to know if our future is still ours. Respect Ouattara, but we want to know if our future is still ours." That's not rebellion. That's a plea for generational inclusion, for a peaceful transition that allows the old to mentor and the young to lead. This moment in Ivory Coast is symbolic, because what happens there echoes in every African capital, from Yaoundé to Kampala, from Kinshasa to Dakar. Will Africa's old leaders choose legacy or longevity? Will they prepare successors or protect their seats? Will they leave behind institutions or just memories? If they choose legacy, history will remember them as nation builders. If they choose longevity, history will remember them as gatekeepers who stood in the way of progress. Ivory Coast's election is not just about who won, it's about whether democracy itself can still mean something to the people. Because when citizens stop believing their votes matter, they stop believing in the system altogether. And that, more than any coup or crisis, is the slow death of democracy. Africa doesn't lack leaders, it lacks letting go. And until the old release their grip, the young will continue to look for hope elsewhere, in the desert, on the boats, or in the silence of apathy. If you believe Africa's future belongs to its youth, if you believe leadership must evolve, not just endure, then speak, share, and stand, because silence only helps the status quo. Let's keep the conversation alive. Let's keep Africa awake. You've been watching See Africa TV, bringing Africa's voice back to the center. Subscribe, follow, and join our growing community of thinkers and doers across the continent. Disclaimer, this program is based on publicly available reports from BBC and Africanews. It reflects analysis and commentary on current events for educational and informational purposes. See Africa TV stands for balanced journalism, African truth, and independent thought.